I think his favorite works would be the ones that he had an emotional attachment to, which would probably be the works that he did from being abroad. Venice was one of the special places. He loved Greece. I've not seen his paintings of Cuba or Ireland because I did not go with him to those countries. But I imagine since his roots were in Ireland, that would be his favorite paintings. But I'm thinking that since we spent 30 years going to all these Mediterranean countries, that these were special to him.
And the other thing that Don was so good at doing is that he would get involved and live in the environment, sometimes days on end, and just become immersed in the landscape and talk to the people, get to know the people and the cultures even, and as he did down in Baja, California, where he traveled when we were young, and he would do subsequent travels for sometimes 2 to 3 weeks at a time. And we sometimes would become concerned about him because we'd wonder if he was okay. But Don always seemed to make it back. He did, and he'd come back with great ideas to his next wonderful watercolor.
Dad did a lot of traveling. Dad traveled across the United States and painted. Dad traveled up and down Mexico and did a lot of painting in Mexico and in Guatemala. And later in life, Dad traveled to Europe. Dad loved Venice. Dad loved Greece. Dad loved Ireland. It was a big part of his artwork.
Fun. I remember we stopped off at a restaurant, I believe in Lone Pine, because the mountains we were going to was Mammoth Mountain. We go in the summer though. And he was an eater, but I never really knew it. I mean, when I travel, we eat light and just keep going. But at the breakfast table, he would order 4 different things, as where we each order a small something, and then he orders 4 somethings. And I'm thinking, well, maybe he's just ordering for everyone and expects us to pick off his plates. And I realized, no, they were for him. I mean, he let us, of course, if we asked, he'd give them to us, but they were his breakfast. And I just think, I never knew my grandfather be such an eater until I watched him eat 4 breakfasts.
First thing he would say to me is, Joe, let's have a cup of coffee. And he would grind the coffee. Generally speaking, he would always give me a little bit to bring home to Eileen, or quite often. And we would have a cup of coffee. But I would always have a painting with me whenever I went, because I was taking classes with Alfred also. And he would sit and look at that painting. And occasionally he would say something nice. Occasionally. But he never ever hurt my feelings. He had a way of critiquing a painting, for me, where I knew that if I listened, that the next painting I did would be better.
He was quite comfortable with his studio, gallery, and living in the same place. He was comfortable having a vehicle for 10 years or longer, the same vehicle. That was the type of guy he was. He didn't need a whole lot of flash.
Don's in the middle years and late years, his style of painting was to take slides, although he was one of the best sketchers that I know, but he still, with his architecture background, would take slides of something and project them, and then he would have to straighten the lines of perspective to be vertical, and he would just, I guess, decide on some sort of a color sense and a color tone for the whole painting and go from there.
Obviously you said you liked the style, which is very much Don's sort of California style movement. Mm-hmm. What is it about it that you like so much?
I don't know that I can explain it in words, because if you look around at the collection, you'll see bright, you'll see dark skies, you'll see colored skies, bright sky, you'll see so much that's different. But I don't know, it's just, I'm not an artist. I know what I like. I don't know that I can explain it. Clearly, he was pretty popular. So I'm not the only one that liked his art.
No.
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 I don't know that I can put it into words. I just love the way, especially he handled his historic buildings in Riverside. And I've lived here most of my life, so.
Well, as an architect, he rendered paintings as an architect, which meant that they were mostly sort of pinpoint, meaning that the subject was in the middle and it sort of faded out towards the edge or else was covered by foliage. And he did retain a lot of that. I think one of his chief hurdles was to decide how to fill the corners. And, of course, he did that very expertly as he continued painting, so that at the end I think he was superior at that. His great joy would be in painting, but then again he also kept a few architectural jobs. He worked for UCR and designed many buildings while he started painting, and he kept his AIA signature, which was Institute of Architects, I think probably for his whole life. So he still remained an architect and was always interested in buildings.
Do you feel like you're seeing Riverside in a different way from his artwork?
Well, sure.
That he's
because
influenced the way
Riverside
he
is
works?
changing. You know, there's new buildings being built, old buildings being torn down, and there's a history to his art. Even the buildings that have been restored, if you look at this particular one, the Fox Theater, it doesn't have the new marquee, it doesn't have a number of the things. This is, remember the old Greyhound bus station was there? There was the old bus station sign. That's not there anymore. So in a way, that gives you a sense of what was there before, even though the building's been restored. And that's true with a lot of the depot, you know, the train station. You know, things do disappear and change, and so this is like a history of Riverside.
I think he was one of the premier painters of Riverside. I know there were several banks that have huge collections of his watercolors. He was very good also on marketing, and as a fellow artist, I think that is one of the hardest things for an artist to do, is to market himself or herself, to actually make a living out of it. So we both managed to pay the rent and food and necessities like that with our work. And Don was one that inspired me to send paintings to the American Watercolor Society, which is the premier society for watercolorists. It's an established watercolor society, one of the first. And Don got his AWS signature membership before I did.
When was the first moment that you realized that he was an artist, that was what he did, and how good he was?
Really my entire life. I never really had a chance to learn about art outside of that as a small child. I mean, you learn about your family before you learn about strangers. You don't go to art museums and learn about other people's art when your grandfather's an artist. So that was actually like my exposure to it. So to me, I grew up with that as being definitively art. I mean, if your grandfather's an artist and that's all you know, that's what you grow up as being art.
Sonia cooked some great meals in that little kitchen, but he was satisfied with that. You know, he wasn't worried about the shower, worried about the couch. He loved his cat, loved that cat. He absolutely loved that studio. He loved his Thursday night demos. People didn't realize they were free. He gave those free. He always wanted to give back what he had received from other artists.
Our families traveled and got together often, and the place we'd go visit and spend time at was up at Lake Gregory and Big Bear. And the O'Neills had this Volkswagen van, and they always kept it running, but it wasn't the fastest, and it didn't have the kind of horsepower carrying 8 to 9, 10 people. And I can remember many times that we had to get out of the van. Most of us had to get out of the van because Don could not get up the hill. So we'd come to a stop, and we'd literally get out of the van, and then Don would move ever so slowly with all the oomph that the Volkswagen had left, and he'd make it up the next hill. And he'd wait for us to hike to get to his destination.
We tried to make at least one trip a year, and one of the biggest amounts of times that we spent was the 20 years we kept going down to Mexico and Chiapas. And then we added 2 people. We added Gail Gagnon Garcia, who was a silversmith and a weaver, and Becky Jones, who was a sculptor and a potter. And so the 4 of us went down a couple of years, and then we had shows together. We probably had 10 shows together. So RCC, a gallery in Los Olivos, and then at our separate galleries we would have shows, or else we would go all together into his storeroom gallery, which was his own studio.
Dad loved to be around people. Dad loved to teach. Dad loved it when he was the limelight of what was going on. In a lot of ways, he really enjoyed his celebrity status.
Obviously, the exhibit is one step toward making sure that people still remember Don. But do you think that his artwork will continue to be part of the community and be something that will be remembered for?
Well, this was actually very important to me because my grandfather, as he was dying, he was a dying man, and he didn't want to be a dying artist. He didn't want to die with his physical body. Well, I hope everyone continues to enjoy his work. I hope everyone continues to support California Watercolor. It's going to really take everyone's work to make this a legacy that doesn't die. I hope everyone enjoys the show. My grandfather would be thrilled to see you all here. He would be very modest about it, but I am thrilled on his behalf, and he would be fairly quiet. But I want to thank you all for showing up. I want to thank you all for having the show, the Riverside Art Museum. And let's hope that the future of California Watercolor has more than the past.
Well, I think he'd want to be remembered through his art and the fact that he had so much talent but flexibility in subject. Because I know he did, when he traveled, he did a lot, which I don't have that art here. I have his art, by the way, at home too. So not just here. But I think when you put together a show like this, I think he'd be excited that everybody would get a chance to see really his range of art, which I'll bet you many people have no idea that he had. Because they'll see a Fox Theater, or they'll see something else, or a Mission Inn, or whatever, here and there, but they had no idea what he did when he was, traveling in Europe and wherever. So, right. I think he'd be pretty excited about this show.
Well, I'm glad that this show is being done because I think Don was a superior painter, and he and I were the only 2 in this area that do have that signature. I think his passion for painting overwhelmed every other passion that he had. I think he was a true painter, that painting was his number 1 role in life, and those of us that understood it and appreciated his work will remember him for a long time.
I miss him a lot, yeah. Yeah, miss him a lot, yeah. Loved working with him all those years. He was just so wonderful to work with. I mean, we all work with, different people in different lines of business and so on, and it was just always such a treat every year to know that, next year I'd be working with Don again.
But I just hope that he's not forgotten. That's the most important as far as I'm concerned, that when you're an artist, you don't want to be forgotten. And one time he told me that exactly. He said, I hope they don't forget me. I hope they don't forget my work.